Hi friend, I wanted to take a quick minute to connect you with a free resource that I know will be helpful in your pain to purpose journey. It's our free 7-day devotional that you can sign up for right now. With it, you'll get 7 daily devotionals written by our founder, Davey Blackburn, delivered to your inbox each morning. These are adapted from our Pain to Purpose 42-day devotional and are full of daily scripture readings, questions to reflect upon, and prayer prompts to help you focus your heart. If you're looking for some encouragement in whatever you're facing, this is it, and it's free. You just have to go to devo.nothingiswasted.com to sign up. I don't know your story, but what I do know is that God isn't done with it. Whether you've endured a recent loss, a divorce, an unexpected diagnosis, or some other pain point, God wants to give you hope when it seems like it is lost. Let's take 7 days together to find that hope in whatever you're walking through. Sign up today at devo.nothingiswasted.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I'm Aubrey Sampson.
And I'm Davey Blackburn, and it's so good to have you guys back for another week.
So good to have you.
Yes, I always love having this time with you, and I hope that you love having this time with us. Otherwise, I'm sure you wouldn't be listening right now. Today we have an incredible conversation with Kristen LaValley. Kristen,
oh man, she's amazing.
She really is. Some of you may know her from a really popular mommy blog that she had for a while called Win at Home. And I mean, she was featured on all kinds of different, really popular publications,
outlets,
media outlets and stuff like that. But then she shifted, she and her husband both made a big career shift, life change. And in the middle of all of that, a lot of stuff, a lot of traumatic things begin to happen in their life. And so including a crisis twin pregnancy. And you know, I mean, she's got an incredible story. There's so much, I'm not going to ruin it, but I want you guys, this is what I love about the conversation that we have is this idea of, okay, even if God doesn't show up the way that I expect him to, right?
Yeah.
And we kind of toggle back and forth a little bit in the conversation about this idea of even if and even when, like sometimes we can, you know, but we often tend to place our faith on a contingency plan with God.
Yeah. Oh,
and
it's so true.
She's got this new book that she just released called Even If He Doesn't. And I was so intrigued and compelled by the title of this and her story. I had to bring her story to you guys. I had to.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to be so good. I cannot wait to listen. Before we take a listen to Davey's conversation with Kristen, Davey, any book updates you need to share with our people?
Well, you know, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit. July 30th, make sure you are tuned in. July 30th is when we're releasing Nothing is Wasted, the book. You can go for all those updates because pre-orders start now in just a couple of weeks. In fact,
that's awesome. Mark your calendars.
That's right. This past week on our email, our social media, we started inviting you to be a part of the launch team. So if you want to be a part of the launch team or, you know, kind of our street team to get the word out there, I want you to go to nothingiswastedbook.com. You can find out information about the book, about pre-orders, about the book launch event that we're holding here in Indianapolis. We'd love for you to be a part of that. You can be a part of it live here in person. There's also a virtual ticket option, so you could just tune into the streaming if you want to. And most important, most urgently right now, we want you to be a part of our street team, our launch team, if you will. Yes. So go ahead and sign up for that right there. Nothingiswastedbook.com. We'd love to invite you to be a part of that.
Yeah, gonna be so fun. I like to tell people, since there aren't really bookstores like there used to be, launch teams are the new bookstore. So we need you, and it's gonna be so fun to be on the Nothing is Wasted book launch team. So what is it again? Nothing is Wasted book.com?
Nothingiswastedbook.com. Yep.
Love it. Hey, we also want to invite you to a free live call with Davey for 5 steps to taking back your story. You can sign up for that simply by going to nothingiswasted.com/start here. I think we've done the announcements, Davey, so let's go ahead and take a listen to your conversation with Kristen LaValley.
Well, Kristen, thanks for joining me on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. It's so great to have you.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, we might as well be inside having great conversations about the Lord while everything we can see on your screen, everything is...
It's frozen.
Frozen outside.
So cold.
I feel like all across the country, that's what we're experiencing right now. So
yeah, it's crazy.
I appreciate you getting up early, having this conversation with me. I'd love for you to just share a little bit about who you are, just kind of give our audience some context for you before we dive into some of your story, what your family's like, where you guys are living, what's happening in your life right now.
Sure. Well, I have been married to my husband for 15 years. We were in career ministry for 10 of those 15 years, starting when we were 19. So we kind of like grew up in career ministry and left that world right after our 30th birthdays, actually, which is crazy to think about. But we have 5 kids. We live in Massachusetts, and he works for a nonprofit, and I write, and we homeschool all of our kids, and our lives are very busy and very full, and we love it. It's fun.
Well, you guys have been on quite a journey. I mean, if anybody's followed your journey, I know some of our community will have, that, I mean, everything from an RV to all kinds of fun things throughout building your family. So I feel like that's always a dream for everybody. We dream about that, but we don't have the courage to actually do it,
Yeah, it was crazy. It was kind of an impulsive, we can do it. Let's just do it now. And then it happened to have lined up with the pandemic, which was not the greatest, but it ended up being okay because we just basically stayed in the woods and beaches for a year, and it was fun. It was great.
I mean, it almost sounds providential. It's like, I'm going to shut my world down, and before the world shuts down, we're going to go ahead and prep for this.
Yeah, it was great.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Kristen, you've gone through quite a few difficult circumstances. You've written this new book called Even If He Doesn't, which is going to be released right as we're releasing this interview. It's going to be, I think it will have just released. But I'd love for you to share a little bit about some of those things you guys experienced as a family that prompted you to write about this.
The first really big thing that kind of sent us on this adventure, this spiraling of faith and suffering and all of that, is when we left our last church ministry position. We weren't fired, but we were kind of forced out. And the way that the pastor and the board did that was really harmful and caused a trauma of sorts, relational trauma, and it's kind of sent my faith into this spiral of everything that I thought was true about God, everything that I thought was true about my faith. This formula that I've been following for so long just fell apart, and I really had to decide if I was gonna double down on the things that I was holding in my hand with a tight grasp, those doctrines, that entitlement, that if I do this, God will do that. Am I going to double down on that, or am I going to open up my hands and see who God is really and who he is to me right now? And so that kind of set my faith on this journey of just openness to who God is, and instead of holding on to what I wanted him to be, who I wanted him to be. And over the next 5 years, we experienced a couple different things. Almost immediately within a year of leaving our church, I saw someone get murdered in our backyard when I was home alone with our kids. And then a year later, we lost a baby. And then a year after that, we went through a really traumatic crisis pregnancy with our twins that ended up in a traumatic C-section, emergency C-section, and then 2 months in the NICU. And it sounds so much when you say it all back to back like that, but it did kind of it felt like, okay, when are the hits gonna stop coming? Yeah. So that led to me writing a book about suffering and how what we believe about God shapes how we experience suffering, and how we experience suffering shapes who we believe God to be.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting, like, especially in our generation and growing up in Western American Christianity, if you grew up under that construct, we tend to, whether this is like actually, preached from the stage or taught to us directly, we tend to think that God's a very transactional God. If I do A, B, and C, if my performance is good enough, or if I check all the boxes, then God's going to bless me. Like, everything's going to be up and to the right, which is crazy, right? Because Jesus told us in this world you would have trouble, but it seems like, I know in my own personal life, before I experienced the big crisis of losing my wife, I felt that same way. It was like, well, as long as I'm, trying my best to stay faithful to God, then there might be a little bit of pain, but surely it's not going to be this thing that where just like what you've just described, hit after hit after hit. How did parse out a little bit for us how that began to untangle what you believed about God, and then what did it begin to teach you about him as you're seeing him show up in these things?
I had this really truly formulaic faith. I have this visual of what my faith was like before, and it's just like this neatly lined garden. Like if you'd go into a big crop and you'd see all the crops all in a line. That's what my faith was, and I tended to it very particularly and made sure everything was always right all the time. And that transactional nature of my faith was, if I am a good girl, if I don't sin, if I confess my sin, if I tithe, if I give to missions, if I serve, if I'm sacrificial, if I address conflict the right way, if I follow all the rules, God will protect me, he'll bless me, he'll vindicate me. And when we went through what we went through at our church, what happened to us was so unfair, and unfair to me, unfair to my husband, unfair to my kids. It was just this really unnecessary thing that happened. And the first couple months as we left the church, we had to leave our house. The church had bought us a house, built us a house. We had to leave our house. We had to leave our career. Wow. We only had Bible school degrees. We only had work experience in the church. So it was just this total upending of our entire lives. And I kept waiting for God to vindicate us. I'm like, he's like, the Lord is my vindication. He's going to take care of us. He's going to come through, and we're going to be on top. And that never happened. And that really shook what I believed my relationship to God to be, because I thought I did everything right, and yet you're still not here. You've still abandoned me. Now I can look back and see that he was actually rescuing us the whole time, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like he had cast us out, and he had said, you know what, you're never going to be good enough. You're never going to do enough. As hard as you've tried your entire life, it's not enough for me. And I had to process and go through that process of being honest about my anger, being honest about what I was feeling that God was doing to us, and not trying to stuff it down, be like, it's okay, God is faithful, God is good, I'm just gonna, I don't know why he's doing this, but I believe that he's good. No, I had to say, I actually don't know if you're good. I don't know if you're kind. I don't know if you're faithful. And I got to this point where I didn't care if that would have cost me my faith, if those questions and that pursuit, I didn't care anymore, because I just wanted to find out who God really was. And I think in that openness and that willingness to be wrong, and the willingness to walk away, God really showed who he truly is to me. And I had to kind of let go all of those pretenses, all of those things that I was so sure of. I had to get rid of those so that I could see who God really was. And once I got through that process, that really painful, brutal process of letting go of everything you believe and not sure if you're going to pick anything back up, as I got through that, my faith became less like a neatly tended garden and more like a field of wildflowers, where I don't know, and I'm okay with not knowing where things are growing, but things are growing, and that's good. That's a good thing.
That's a good visual. That's a really good visual. It's interesting. You're not wrong in, okay, God is, Scripture tells us he is our avenger, right? Vengeance is his, that there is a time and a space where God does vindicate in those things, but it's almost like, it's almost like, in haphazardly, we all do this, right? Where we take the promises of God and misappropriate them or misapply them to a particular situation where God's like, well, I want to show you I'm your rescuer in this, as you said.
Yeah.
This is not a situation where I'm showing you I'm your avenger. And I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head right there by saying the only way you can really uncover that stuff is by not suppressing those emotions, but actually exploring some of the why within all of that. Yeah. You guys work. It's really interesting because you guys have done a lot of work now with people who've experienced, whether it's spiritual abuse all the way on that spectrum or just like a church hurt. And you're helping people to still fall in love with Jesus even when they've experienced hurt, woundings from his bride. How do you do that? And maybe out of your own kind of like in your own experience, how did you not attach bitterness that you had toward other people to even the idea of the church and to Jesus, personally?
Okay, could talk. We could have a whole podcast just about that
We
question.
we have a lot of questions about that right now. So I think there are, a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a massive movement going on where people are walking away from the faith because for a lot of reasons, the church has not allowed space for us to ask those difficult questions that you're talking about and dig into some of these really hard emotions and experiences that create cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, and I think because the church has this theology of church that is so integrated into our identity and it's so relational. Christianity is nothing if not relational.
Yeah.
When you experience relational wounds, you automatically associate that with God and who God is to you, and it shakes your entire understanding of the goodness of God, because how can God be good if his people are so mean? For me and my husband, the first thing that we sort of, if you want to use the hot word, deconstructed, the first thing that we deconstructed was our theology of church. And that kind of started before we experienced abuse at our church. It was kind of already stirring up in us, and then that sort of catapulted us into, okay, what is the church actually? And through that restudying of our understanding of church, our theology of church, we were able to say, okay, this is who the bride of Christ is. This is who Christ is. And we were so fortunate to have people who came into our lives who were the bride of Christ to us, not in a church, not in any kind of organized way. They just gave us room to breathe, gave us room to rage and to ask and to push and to have really messy pain management and kind of like, it was a little chaotic there for a little while, but we were so lucky to find people who gave us that space to breathe in a non-anxious way. They weren't panicked. They weren't judgmental. They weren't critical of us. And in that, they helped us find Jesus through the muck of pain, through the muck of this identity crisis we were going through, because it's all of it, right? It's not just, oh, I don't know what I believe anymore, or oh, I got hurt and so now I'm mad. It's this full whole body experience. Your mind, your spirit, your body, everything is so integrated. So when you experience any kind of pain like that, your whole self is affected. And I think it's really important to give people the space that they need to go through that and be the presence of Christ to them, be the aroma of Christ to them. And in that, don't be anxious, don't be critical, don't panic, don't throw this, you're on the slippery slope. Like, okay, we're all on the slippery slope. If there even is a slippery slope, just give them some grippy socks, give them some presents, be with them. And, it might not end up the way that you want it to. Some people do walk away from their faith because they just can't get past that pain. But I think if we change the way we engage with our own pain and we change the way we engage with other people's pain, we change everything. We change the way people experience those kind of things in the church and outside of the church.
What's really interesting, I'm reading a book right now called The Critical Journey, which it's an older book, but it kind of talks a little bit about the idea that the church itself, right? The way that we've conducted Western American church for a couple of decades now, that it provides really great handholds for people's spiritual journey for the first 3 or 4 steps, so to speak, first phases of it. But then when someone hits the wall is what it's called. So maybe that's crisis or something, or some kind of like, again, cognitive dissonance between who they thought God was supposed to be for them, and what their circumstances are saying. They tend to end up walking away from church in a lot of ways if the church doesn't allow space for, interestingly enough, for the mystery of God. I know this sounds like really almost two conflicting concepts, but for the mystery of God to be the anchor for their feet, right?
Yeah.
And it not be so it's not as concrete as what we want to try to, not as black and white as what we want to try to make it. Not to say that, it's like there's not sin and that's not what we're saying here, but it's, we have to be able to go, oh, this is my circumstances, these are my experiences, and God is, right? And be able to open up to who God really is rather than who we've constructed him to be as this transactional God. So it's really interesting that you're saying that, because I feel like that a lot of people experience that right now. They're experiencing the wall. And you're in your experience and in your journey, you started to find where there were quote unquote answers that weren't as concrete in the mysteries of God, with other people, not in a church building, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you bring up the wall, because that was one of the first things someone said to us a few months after we left our church. We were at this church plant, and this guy came in, and he was this pastor of pastors. I don't even know what his position, one of those like leaders in the church organization. Yeah. And he asked us what was going on with us. Never met him before. Like, we were in a totally different city, and we told him, and he said, "Oh, you're at the wall." And he explained that whole concept to us.
Wow.
And there was something about giving us that language and saying, this is a normal thing that you're going through.
Yes.
We all go through it. Now you have to decide what you're going to do when you get past the wall, or if you're going to get past the wall.
Wow.
And I think normalizing that experience helped me not feel so panicked about it. And that was a really crucial part of me getting past my anger and bitterness and frustration, and that, like, I got to try to understand. I got to find the answers. I got to figure out what all this is. But then when he said, "You're at the wall," I was like, oh, okay, I gotta get past this now.
Wow. Kristen, that's so helpful. I'm so glad you said that, because I think sometimes just knowing that this is part of the Christian journey, part of the human experience as we're trying to learn how to become more like Christ, that it's normal.
Yeah, so normal.
And we can find some solidarity in that, right? Where we can go, like what you said, now we don't feel so debased, like, oh no, what's wrong with me? Everybody else seems to be having this other experience, and now there must be something inherently wrong with me, so I don't fit into all of this. I've got to walk away. This is typical, because our human finite minds are trying to comprehend this infinite God in a fallen world. And there's going to be a lot of that cognitive dissonance. And so I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because it gives people that language and those handholds. Hebrews says that, paraphrase, but it's like, be encouraged, because there are saints all over the world going through the same sufferings as you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the enemy wants us to think we're the only one dealing with this, so that he can isolate us and pick us off. But you found community, and I'm really curious about this, like, online kind of community stuff that you found. What were some of the things you learned in that maybe, I don't want to say you couldn't find in like a conventional church or small group, because I don't think you can. It's not that you can't find it, but it's like you found some healing in this community of people all gathering around you guys, that maybe those principles should be or could be transferred back into how the church should operate.
Hey friends, I know that so many of you listening to this are carrying a heavy weight of pain and loss. When we start to process what's happened in our lives, we often find ourselves paralyzed by the pain and not really knowing where to go from here. We even begin to hear or tell ourselves lies like, "This is the end of our story. This will define you." And trust me, I've been there. But with the help of others, I was able to navigate my way out of that valley. And at Nothing is Wasted, we exist to help you navigate your pain and even find purpose in that pain. So if you are new to our community and wondering where to start, or if you've been with us for some time and you're just looking to take the next step, we're hosting a free live call just for you. In it, we're going to talk about 5 steps to taking back your story, no matter what you've gone through. In this call, our founder, Davey Blackburn, will share more of his story, and he's going to teach you 5 critical steps you'll have to take to rewrite your own story. This call is 60 minutes long, but I promise you it will be well worth your time, because in it you will learn how to regain a sense of agency and begin thriving, not just surviving in the midst of trying circumstances. Why having more questions than answers may be an essential part of moving forward. How to get rid of the overwhelming negative emotions that tend to bog you down and get you stuck. The one keystone decision that will help you get out of your pain. How to listen to the right voices when everyone seems to have an opinion on what you should do next, and a ton more. If you are feeling weighed down or paralyzed by the pain you've experienced, you don't have to stay there. And Davey will be your guide and show you the way back to thriving. Go to nothingiswasted.com/start here to sign up for this free live call, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, just click the link in the show notes. We've made it extremely easy to sign up, and we're offering multiple dates and time options for you for this live call to work with your calendar. I believe this one step could be the very breakthrough you need to put you on the redemptive path God has for you. Open the browser on your phone right now and go to nothingiswasted.com/start here, or just click the link we've included in the show notes of this episode. We are in your corner, and we can't wait to connect with you soon.
Hey friend, hope you're enjoying the podcast and these incredible stories of people who are walking through difficult challenges and traumas and finding hope on the other side of them. As many of our guests have shared, healing is a journey, and I want to take a moment to let you know about an incredible tool we offer here at Nothing is Wasted Ministries to help you on your healing journey. Our Pain to Purpose course is truly the heart of what we do. It's a practical, life-changing, proven path to help you move from whatever trauma, tragedy, or trial you have faced in your life into a life of healing and purpose. But I don't want you to just take my word for it. Listen to what Michelle, a Pain to Purpose participant, shared about her experience with the course.
I lost my daughter in November of 2018. She was married, had 2 young children, and it was just a terrible accident. I was definitely struggling with all the whys. The most beneficial part I found was the whole course, but that I needed to lean into my pain. I needed to process my pain, acknowledge it, because you had to feel it to go to process and come out on the other side.
If you're ready to lean into your pain and come out on the other side like Michelle, I want to invite you to sign up now for the Pain to Purpose course by going to course.nothingiswasted.com. Again, that's course.nothingiswasted.com, or if you're watching on YouTube, click the link right below. There you'll get access to all the course videos and everything you need to start moving from pain to purpose. Listen, pain it's inevitable, but you don't have to walk through it without the tools that can bring deeper healing. Let us guide you through whatever you're facing currently. Go to course.nothingiswasted.com.
Well, for me, I don't think it's that I couldn't find it where I was. I think the denomination that I was in was so small and so limited in their perspective, and it was very much like we figured it out kind of thing. Like this is not that we're the elite, but that other people might be Christians, but not as Christian as us. So I was in this really, really tight bubble of thinking and really critical of other denominations, critical of other belief systems, because I thought, oh, well, maybe God will let them into heaven, but they're not led by the Spirit. So they can't have like an abundant life here on earth. And, I had all these kind of like a caste system of spirituality. And when I got out of that particular denomination, I felt like, I don't know, I started meeting all these people from different faith backgrounds, and it opened up my mind and opened up my perspective of who God is to other people and how other people experience him. And so it started with these online communities, but then because those people were so open to me and so welcoming to me, that when I developed relationships with them, I felt this safety in not feeling like I had to stay in my little world and stay in my bubble of unilateral thinking, these homogenous groups that I had been in. And they really opened my mind to see the body of Christ as this diverse, eclectic, beautiful group of people that God can express himself to, and we can experience him in so many different ways. And because of those relationships, I was able to open myself up to relationships in person and in organized ways and in different churches. We were a part of a couple different house churches and things. And I don't think I would have felt safe or comfortable doing that without having met so many different people from so many different places that loved Jesus, in spite of the fact that they didn't love him the way that I thought you had to love him. Yeah, it's really humbling.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting. It's funny. We're reading a little small, almost like kid version and biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer to our kids at night.
Oh,
and
wow.
we just finished a chapter last night, interestingly enough, about Dietrich having that same experience with the Catholic Church when he visited Rome, because he was Protestant German, and he was very niche Protestant German, Lutheran,
Yep.
And then he goes and experiences Catholicism, and during Passover week, during the or Holy Week, as Catholicism calls it, right? During Holy Week. And he was like, literally, people from both sides of World War I, he's observing this, as they're all worshiping in one place, and they're worshiping differently than what I would have slotted myself into, and saying, this is how you're supposed to. But it broadened his vantage point of that and enhanced his view of who God is. And I think that's what you're saying, is that's the power of community, is we can't fully know who God is without other people and their experiences and their vantage points.
Yeah, it's so true.
I'd love for you to share a little bit, and then kind of, as you guys, that transition happened in your life, but then some of these other, seasonally, some of these other difficult things happen, right? You said you were kind of waiting for the next shoe to drop as things just kept happening. Specifically, maybe focus on the pregnancy crisis that you guys experienced and what you were feeling during that and how God showed up in those situations for you.
Oh, that was such a unique suffering that we went through because we had gone through so much before that my faith had become so, I don't know if organic is the right word, but I just felt so comfortable in what I believed, but not in a like doubling down. This is what not in a rigid way, but in a, no, I know that I'm going to be okay. Even if my daughters are not okay, I know that I'm going to be okay. And that was such a gift in that process because we didn't know. We found out at 19 weeks that one of the babies was not likely to be viable much longer because they shared a placenta. So they suggested that we abort one to give the other one a better chance. And at that point, I had wrestled with my beliefs so much that I knew what I believed about God's sovereignty. I knew what I believed about him being the author of life and death. And it wasn't an ideological thing. It wasn't a political thing. It was just, I am not the author and I can't make this decision. I like to use the metaphor of King Solomon with the baby, and he said, I'll cut the baby in half. I was both the mother that had no control and the king holding the sword and deciding the fate of the child. But I just decided not to wield the sword at all and pointed it to myself and said, okay, I'll take the beating for this one because I can't make this choice. And so from 19 weeks to 29 weeks when they were born, every day was, I don't know if this day is gonna end in life or death. And it was this constant, like, I had to wake up every day and truly think about and embody my beliefs. And am I willing to bear the scars of my beliefs on my body? Because that's what this is going to cost me. If I really believe that God is good and God's the author and that I'm going to be okay no matter what, my body is going to bear these scars. Am I willing to do that? And it was this beautiful walk through the valley of the shadow of death and this miraculous story of our girls being okay at the end. Most people who have all the factors we have their stories don't end the way that ours did. And that was also a challenge afterwards. Like, okay, if this was all going to be okay, what's with the drama? Why did it have to hurt so bad if this was all going to be okay in the end? But as difficult as that was and as painful as that was, it was the most beautiful period of suffering that I've had with the Lord.
Wow. It's I love what you said that you actually had to embody your faith.
Yeah.
And the sobering reality for all of us is we're all going to come to a season where we'll be confronted with, do we really believe what we say we believe? Mm-hmm. And the only way that truly is tested is through where we are once suffering hits our life. Mm-hmm. And I hate that reality, Kristen. I hate that. Scripture says, right, that it tests the genuineness of our faith.
Yeah.
And it's not that God needs to know because he knows our heart, right? Mm-hmm. But we need to know if our faith, if what we say we believe is actually what we believe, or if we're living in duplicity in that. True. Man, that I can't imagine that journey for you guys. As every day you're waking up going, okay, what is this? But what an incredible example, Kristen. I mean, I just pause for a second to what you said about I chose to wield the sword on myself, which, I mean, all I could think about was, I mean, isn't that what Jesus did for us, right? Yeah. And it seems like, if I'm just kind of being a commentator on listening to your story, it seems like that's the invitation that Jesus has for us in the midst of our suffering. It's almost like the Garden of Gethsemane moment for all of us, where it's like, hey, are you going to choose self-sacrifice over self-preservation?
Yeah.
And I'm amazed at your choice. I'm really I'm really proud of you guys for choosing that.
Thank you.
Oof. If you're sitting across the table from somebody who they're wrestling with that kind of maybe not that exact same decision. There's not very many people that have to face that kind of dilemma, but there are people who are wrestling with that kind of a faith decision. How would you, now that you've come over on the other side, you share your story with them on that, how would you encourage them? Because we got lots of people who are wrestling with those kinds of, like, do I actually practice or do what I say that what I believe?
I think the biggest hindrance to our faith and to our faith in action is fear and panic. And we worry, I think more than anything else, whether or not we'll be okay. And we base our decisions, maybe not base our decisions, but it's something that we factor into our decisions. Am I going to be okay if I decide this? Am I going to be okay if I decide that? Am I still going to be safe with God? Am I still going to be loved by God? Am I still going to be held by God if I decide this over the other thing? And I think that keeps us in this constant state of anxiety about where we are with God. And I don't think we ever have to worry about that. I think that once we're His always. And even when we're not His, He still cares for us. And these questions of faith and these questions, I mean, even if it's a medical crisis or something more simple than that, I think wrestling with your faith before you're in the fire is a good thing and not something that you should be afraid of. And when you're in the fire and you have to make these decisions, you also don't need to be afraid, and just trust that you're safe with Him and you're loved by Him and you're held by Him. Even if you choose the wrong thing, you're still loved and held.
So good. You said that it was during that season of suffering that I don't know exactly how you said it, but something to the effect of, like, you felt the nearness of God more than anything than what you had experienced, like just His abiding presence there. I'm curious, maybe anecdotally or maybe just just from some of your wisdom, what would you say to the person who, because that's true for some people, right? They feel the manifest presence of God walking them through the valley, right? Psalm 23:4 feels like a reality to them, but some people experience the opposite, where God feels a million miles away in the middle of some of the hardest things they've ever gone through. What would you say to that person?
I would say that was my experience in almost every other season of suffering in my life, where I just felt like I was suffering in a vacuum, and that God wasn't just not near me, but that He had turned His back away from me. And one of the things that I did in one of those seasons where I was just angry and feeling defeated in who God is and who He is to me, and I just was desperate and was like, you know what, I want to see you. I just so badly want to see you and experience you, and I don't know why you're not around, but I'm just going to start looking for you. And I started this practice of practicing the presence of God and also trying to notice His movements in my life, and I started writing them down. And it would be like silly things at first, and then sometimes it would be something that was happening in someone else's life that I could tell, like, God was doing something in their life that's not for me, but I'm going to write it down anyway because you're doing something somewhere else. And so I just started making this habit of noticing Him. And because I started that habit, I started recognizing the patterns and recognizing how God speaks to me and how God shows Himself to me specifically. And so when we got to this experience with our daughters, some people would probably call it delusion, like you're always looking for God in everything, maybe, but it was such a good thing that I had practiced that for so many years, so that when we were walking through that, I was just like constantly on lookout for, all right, where's God doing? Like, what is God saying? Is this guy, like constantly on the lookout for Him? And it was a combination of the practice of noticing and also leaning into the family of God. And God showed Himself so magnificently to us through the family of God during that season. And right before it's like before we even knew anything was wrong, it was a couple days before my appointment where we found out everything was wrong. My husband texted me and he said, I've just been listening to Jesus and I don't know why. I just feel like he's saying that we need to lean into people in this next season of our lives. And we knew that we were having twins. We didn't know anything was wrong. So I thought maybe, okay, like people will bring us casseroles and that'll be the thing. And then after we found out everything was going chaotically, we remembered that and we said, okay, we're just going to lean into this. And if people want to show up for us, however they want to show up for us, we're not going to say no. We're not going to be big about it. We're not going to be prideful. We're just going to say yes. And that was such a good decision for us because God really, I mean, the presence of God was with us, but it was also carried with the people who showed up with us.
Yeah. And I think those two things are so important that we understand how often, I mean, more often than not, those are integrated. That's how God is showing up for us in a lot of ways. It's through other people, especially when, you've experienced a relational wounding and then God's going to use relationship to heal and mend that wounding, to rewrite some of the lies that you're beginning to believe about relationships. Nobody can be trusted, or I can't, that. But how beautiful is that God then brings people around you to heal and mend that. I want you to parse out a little bit. 'Cause I know what you're talking about. There's a lot of people, though, that may not know what you're talking about. The concept of practicing the presence. What does that mean? How do you do that? Why is that important? Share that with us a little bit.
It's important because our lives are so full, and especially if you're at the stage of life where you're working a lot, you have kids, and your lives are just... you're on a sprint to the end of the day. You can kind of get to the end of the day and have never even turned your thoughts towards God. And practicing the presence of God is just this beautiful way of noticing him throughout your day. If you don't have time to sit and just be quiet and meditate and pray and have your devotion. Who has
can't
time?
Get your Zen on as a mom.
Yeah, right. Like,
or
what is that?
Running kids around to sporting events and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone asked me recently, "Where do you go to pray during the day?" And I was like, "My car." And I'm driving to the grocery store. Maybe I don't know. I don't have a prayer closet anymore. But practicing the presence of God is this. Building a habit in yourself throughout the day of tuning in to God's voice, maybe sometimes even asking, okay, God, what are you doing right now? And I'll start my day off usually just a quick little prayer as I'm getting out of bed. God, show me where you are today. Show me who you are today. Show me yourself through people. Show me you through my kids, whatever it is. This starting my day off thinking, okay, I want to see God show up some way today. Help me to pay attention to what you're doing. And it's not anything big or structured that you have to do. It's just throughout your day building the habit of tuning into God's voice and tuning into what he's doing around you, even in the menial tasks of your day. You could even set an alarm on your phone if you just want to remember as you're building that habit, like, okay, let me tune in today like this for the next 30 seconds or so. Let me see what God is saying to me. It's really simple, but it's a really beautiful way of building that habit in yourself.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I also love what you said about noticing God in other people's stories, noticing how he's showing up in other people's lives, especially if you can't quite tune into how he's doing it in yours. And it's, kind of that concept of borrowing other people's faith or letting their testimony or, to really help you to overcome, as Revelation 12 says. And I think that's imperative. I do a Zoom call called 5 Steps to Taking Back Your Story, no matter what you've gone through. And that's one of the steps I actually tell people is notice where God is showing up in other people's stories when you're having trouble seeing where he's showing up in yours. And it begins to put, like what you said, this lens over your spiritual eyes to say, oh, this is how God does this. This is how, not that God's in a box, but he tends to, and sometimes patterns in ourselves. This is how he speaks to me typically. This is how he speaks to other people typically. And you can begin to go, oh, this God must be up to something because I'm seeing some of these same patterns happen that I see in biblical characters or friends of mine around me who God is showing up in really tremendous ways in their life. So it's just what an important thing. I love that you were sharing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's good to borrow hope from other people when your hope is on short supply.
Yeah. So the book that you've recently written that's just now released as the time of the release of this interview. I'd love to hear a little bit about this even if concept for you, and where that, because that's not just a trite phrase. That's not just a cute title. That's a deep wrestling.
Yeah, it is.
And so, so I'd love to hear kind of what was some of the inspiration behind this idea of even if.
So that came because after we found out what was going on with the girls, I had posted about it on Instagram, and just was asking for prayer. I don't usually, when we're going through something, I don't usually talk about it as we're going through it. I usually wait until afterwards because I just like to be a little bit more emotionally controlled when I talk to the internet. But for some reason in this thing, I just felt like I needed to share it right away. And I was desperate. I was terrified. And I have this platform. Who wouldn't call on thousands of people to pray when your daughter's lives are on the line? Right. So I posted and shared what was happening. And within 24 hours, it had gone pretty viral. And I was noticing a lot of the messages that I was getting and the stories that were being posted about it were people praying for us and saying, God, give them a victory so the world can see how good you are. And I just wrestled with that so much because I knew I wasn't guaranteed a victory, and I knew that God's goodness wasn't dependent on my victory. And I had this platform, and now I've shared this story, and people are watching me and waiting to see what happens. And I know how quickly something not going the way you want it to go can break your faith. If you're putting all your eggs in that basket and it doesn't go that way, you can be like, wow, God is not good. How could God allow this thing to happen? Yeah. So I was on my way up to my brother's house. My whole family were getting together and they were going to pray for me. And then I had another appointment at another hospital like 4 hours away. So it was this whole like chaotic thing happening. And I pulled over at a rest area in Vermont and I set my phone up and I started talking about this concept of bartering with God or basing your idea of God on whether or not he gives you a victory. And I started talking about some other things that we went through and how I didn't get what I asked for, and God was still good in those moments, and he was still faithful, and he was still glorified in my pain, and I did need a victory. And so as I was talking, I said, even if this doesn't go the way that we want it to go, I'll still believe that he's good and kind and faithful. And so that even if was, like you were talking about earlier about how suffering reveals your faith. I don't feel like my faith was built in that suffering, in that experience, but I feel like it was exposed in it. And that even if came out of this deep understanding of pain and suffering and getting what I prayed for and not getting what I prayed for, and seeing God's goodness in both of those scenarios and his glory in both of those scenarios, and seeing no difference in his goodness in the bad and his goodness in the good. And that even if is born out of knowing pain and knowing God's goodness in that pain.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. What another sobering reality is that it's often, it's a more robust faith that is revealed to the world when God doesn't show up in the way that you think or everybody else expects him to.
Yeah, it's so
That's
true.
the other sobering reality, right? I mean, people think about when it comes to miracles or healing gifts, different things like that, where it's like, oh, if you have faith big enough, God's going to show up in this way. And I actually think we have that reversed in a lot of respects. It's like, no, if you still lean in and stay tethered to him and stay steadfast, even if he doesn't.
Yeah.
That's a genuine faith.
Definitely.
Whew. Wow. Kristen, this has been a remarkable conversation. I'm so grateful for how you guys have walked through some of these valleys that you've gone through in your life. I'd love for our community to follow along with your journey and what you guys are doing. Where can they connect with you?
Best place is Instagram, and it's just at Kristen.LaValley. And then I also have a Substack too, which is just KristenLaValley.substack.com.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing with us. You're building our faith, and I know everybody needs to go and pick up a copy of Even If He Doesn't, because if you're having trouble right now as you're listening to this, you're watching this on YouTube, if you're having trouble figuring out where God is in your own story, Kristen shares a lot about where God has shown up in hers, and it's a prime example of what we just talked about. You can notice those things and begin practicing the presence of God. So Kristen, thanks for sharing so vulnerably with us. It's been an honor to have you on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, Aubrey, what'd you think?
I mean, this woman has lived a life and is so honest about it, so honest about her faith, and so honest about what it means to have faith while suffering. And I appreciate so many things that Kristen talked about, kind of this concept that we all have like formulaic relationship with God, even though we know better, we still are kind of like, but if I do this, God will certainly do this. And I love that she talked about that. I love that she talked about even just church pain. I think that's so relatable to so many people right now.
Yep.
And that she began to be able to separate Jesus from people who hurt her. I think that's so much wisdom. And then the other thing is, I know, Davey, specifically, this has been something you're walking through right now, is this practicing the presence, especially in seasons of pain.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, and I'll back up just a little bit, because the things you mentioned right there, Aubrey, it seems to me that we talk often about the classroom of pain. Mm-hmm. That when you finally get to a place where you go, okay, Lord, I want to learn everything that you're the greatest teacher.
Yep.
You know, Isaiah 30 says, the teacher will hide himself no more. Though he give you the bread of adversity, the water of affliction, the teacher will hide himself no more. He will be like a voice whispering to you, this is the way, walk in it. So you get to a place where you go, okay, I've just walked through I'm in this like pain and suffering. My ears are attuned to you now, God. Would you teach me? There are these, it's almost like a syllabus. I really do. I'm like, I see this thread over and over and over, the things that God tends to teach us in the middle of suffering, no matter what the suffering is.
Wow.
One of those is, hey, I'm not a formulaic God.
That's a big one.
I'm not a God of your expectations. Right. I'm a God of my promises. That's it.
I have a friend, Jessie Cruikshank, she's an author too. She says he's not a toy poodle in your purse.
He's not a vending machine God. Yeah. He's not like all of these things that we like, for whatever Western American culture creeps into and starts to entangle itself around our theology. Yeah. And it gets so syncretistic, I guess you could say. Yeah. That's one of them. Another one is, I am finding that my community or the church, or like, it's not something, they didn't show up for me the way somebody disappointed me in this.
Yeah, that's so true. Wow.
And that's partially God. We see that happen in our story. God's going, yes, but I will never disappoint you. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. Right? So it starts to pull away from us the people that we tend to rely on or put on the throne of our lives. Right? So again, it's like this syllabus. I see it over and over and over. It's amazing.
Interesting, Davey.
But then also it's this, okay, now I need you to just be attuned to me.
Yeah.
And I want you to practice the presence.
Yep.
And sometimes it's going to be in this, and this is what I struggle with. I love practicing the presence in situations that are like alone, quiet, worship.
Yes. Like peaceful, harmonious.
I can totally focus on God, or I'm studying, or I'm in like, but when it comes to like the day in, day out grind, the parenting kids, the laundry, the chores, the dishes, the the mundane. Sometimes I fail to see how God is trying to mature me in the mundane.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That's so true. Those sort of just either tedious or boring or stressful day-to-day situations. It's a little more difficult to be intentional about, like, okay, God, where are you while I'm folding this 1,000th pair of pants?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I'll find myself, I don't know if this is true for you, I'll find myself in the morning, and this is what I'm really trying diligently to like push against, but my practice was, okay, in the morning, I'm having a great time with the Lord. You know, nobody's awake. Yeah. It's quiet. Yeah. It's okay. And that's great. I'm not deviating from that. Yeah. But then what I would find is that, like, where are you, God, through the rest of the day, right? Because I'm just doing my thing. I'm like, it's almost like I leave that time in the morning and go, okay, God, I got this.
Well,
I'm going to take care of this.
I'll see you there tomorrow. I'll meet you there tomorrow. Yeah.
So now what I'm trying to focus on so much, particularly in the season, is like, okay, God, where are you right now in this moment? Where are you right now in this conversation as I'm, having disciplining my kids, so how are we threading the presence of God and being open and aware and attuned to it throughout my entire day? Because that conversation in the morning does not need to stop.
I think that's really, this is a side note, and I want to come back to like how you actually do that, but I think this is especially healing and helpful word for moms of little kids or stay-at-home dads, because that carved out time in the morning, which I love, is so sacred and beautiful, is not realistic in seasons where you're up all night nursing babies, or your kids get up early, or et cetera.
Right.
And you can feel guilty like you're missing out on the spiritual life.
Yes.
But of course, God does not confine himself to that little small moment. That's man-made.
Right.
It's beautiful to worship God in the morning, but it's not as if God just suddenly removes his presence and you can't grow spiritually as a mom, as a stay-at-home dad. Like, there has to be truth that God is in all of it. So I think it's so good for us to, I mean, again, I'm with you. I love that quiet time in the morning, but it's so good for us to move beyond that in our connection to God. So, okay, Davey, let's get really practical. How do you personally practice the presence of God in the quotidian, in the mundane?
This is very still theoretical. By the way, I would point everybody to, you and I both have read this. We're very familiar with Brother Lawrence, Practicing the Presence. It's really thought-provoking and stirring this up. The monastic life in and of itself is not a life where they're just, we kind of think of hermitage and they just kind of pull back and all they do is pray. No, a real monastic rule of life is full of order and chores and work, and they're teaching these, monks or the, whatever, like priests, people who have joined into that monastic life. They're teaching them how to do that, how to experience the presence of God in those. So we need to take that same kind of monastic living, so to speak, and bring it into our rule of life. So part of that, theoretically, again, I'm still working through some of this stuff and trying to practice it out, but I'm seeing a shift. So that's good. It's like, oh, maybe this is working. Part of it is induced by a certain type of fasting, I believe.
Interesting.
So what we have experienced, we just came off of a 21-day prayer and fasting kind of season at the beginning of the year. So we, in our family, we each had something we were fasting from. It doesn't have to be food, but we were like, okay, we're fasting from something in this season to make us more aware of where God is.
Good.
Every time we think about this thing that we want, we're being aware of God.
That's so
and we're
good.
just kind of, it's just a mental thing there. Now we're heading into, at the time of this release, we're in the middle of Lent.
Yeah.
So right at the end of Lent, I guess, is probably as you're listening to this, but at the time that you and I are talking about this, we're like right at the beginning of this thing. So we're doing another, like, okay, what are we fasting? So Christy and I are, okay, we're fasting from television.
Oh, nice.
Whoa.
Whoa.
What our normal MO would be, we get the kids to bed, we sit down and we veg out, we watch a show, we watch it, right? Because we're just exhausted.
Yeah, totally.
Now we're going, nope, we're not doing that. We're just going to.
That's awesome.
And so we're starting to see a little bit of a shift of like, even kind of life, some of those distractions that you would normally just kind of, it almost mind numbs.
Yeah, kind of go to without even thinking about it. Yeah.
Your mind begins to open up a little bit more, and we're experiencing the presence of God. So that's one of them. The other thing is, I got intentional this year about what are the things we want to teach our kids and help them to identify the 7 virtues. So, there's like 7 sins, 7 deadly sins. There's a counterpart of 7. There's actually more Catholicism than it is, at least in the Catholic tradition. There's like 7 virtues that in the catechism of Catholicism, they try to impart into the kids. Well, I was like, well, those are great virtues.
Yeah, why wouldn't my kids know that?
Let's celebrate those things when we see them in our kids, and then let's discipline those things, and help them. So now, if we're having a disciplinary conversation or a celebratory conversation with them, I'm asking them, which virtue is this? Which one is this that we're talking about?
No way.
And and this has been really cool because I'm like, oh, it's forcing them to think through, oh, this is the virtue of diligence.
Wow.
I'm not being diligent with this chore that you asked. I'm just kind of, I'm not sticking to it, finishing it fully.
Yeah.
I'm being distracted. So it's forcing these conversations. What that's doing, I know that kind of almost sounds like working man-made.
Right.
It's actually forcing us to be more intentional about inviting the Spirit of God, because we always point our virtues back to the fruit of the Spirit.
That's good.
So inviting the Spirit of God to inform what we're doing throughout the day.
Yeah.
And it's caused me as a parent to be more attuned to that
I was just
stuff.
thinking you're more mindful of it, probably.
And go, yes, and go, God, where are you working in them right now? And I think that has really shifted me a lot. It's almost like it's less, God, where are you working in me? Yes, that's true too. Where are you working in my kids, and how are you asking me to partner in that?
Wow.
So those are some things right now that I'm like in real time.
I love
sorting
this.
through.
I love this. We'll have to continue this conversation because I think probably a lot of people, and you mentioned a rule of life. I don't know that we've even talked about that here on the Nothing is Wasted podcast, what that means. Davey's not talking about like rules necessarily, but like kind of a guide or like a rhythm to your life that you stick to.
Yep.
And so that's so good, Davey. I love thinking about
Aubrey,
that.
in the Pain to Purpose course, we call it the irreducible minimums for life.
Oh, that's
because that's the first time I was introduced to the idea of a rule of life. Was my mentor. He said, "What are your irreducible minimums?"
Wow.
Meaning, like, boil your whole life down to the most important things. What has to be true of your life in order for you to thrive in your relationship with Jesus, in your marriage, in your parenting, and in your calling?
Oh, it's so good. I'm actually writing that down right now. That's so good.
Yeah, it's a really, and so we actually go through that with people in Waypoint 9. In Waypoint 10 at the very end, when we're teaching them how to build their Pain to Purpose plan.
So good.
We teach them a rule of life is essentially what we're teaching them.
I love that. I am so glad you just brought up the Pain to Purpose course, because we have more than the podcast. We've got courses, we've got coaching, we've got content for you. And so we would love to invite you to go to our website, nothingiswasted.com/start here to find out how you can get involved. There's a live Zoom event that Davey does just to kind of get you started with taking back your story and invite you into some next steps here. So again, that's nothingiswasted.com/start here. We also want to invite you to go to nothingiswastedbook.com to find out all things about the Nothing is Wasted book, the launch team, pre-orders, party, release. It's going to be so, so much fun. As always, we want to thank Sleeping at Last for providing all of the music for the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Be sure to like and follow us at Nothing is Wasted Ministries. Rate the old podcast, y'all, on Apple Podcasts to help others find these stories as they're walking through their own valleys.
Yep. Next week, I'm so excited about this conversation, Aubrey. You guys have
this is a
probably
good
heard of him. I don't, he wrote a book that was, it was viral, not a fan.
Yep.
This would have been back probably like in, I don't know, was it like maybe right after college or around college for me? I don't remember when that book was released, but that was the first time I was introduced to Kyle Idleman. And we have an incredible conversation with him about some season of really some major distress that he went through under the pressure of being a pastor.
Wow.
And, we know this, that the weight of ministry and the weight of life, really, especially at post-COVID, there's just so much anxiety and depression, but we're seeing it happen so much with our ministry leaders.
Yeah, it's so
And
true.
so it's easy for us to kind of like point fingers at some of these moral failures that we see happening. But it was really great to see him. Now, Kyle hasn't had like a moral failure publicly or anything like that, but to see him talk vulnerably about wrestling through that. And hey, here's some things that it was so, so powerful. So I can't wait for you guys to listen to this conversation, watch this conversation with Kyle Idleman. Go ahead and listen or watch a little clip right now from my conversation with Kyle.
The tendency I would have, and I think a lot of people would have, is to address those things, to fix those things by, okay, here's my plan. I'm going to read this book, and I'm going to come up with these best practices on how to become, how to have less anxiety or how to be less offended or whatever. And all those things have a place. Like, it's not that is bad, but it must come from abiding. Like, it must start with connection. And, the picture that I think is helpful is like this idea of, like, if you're buttoning a shirt, if you get the top button right, then all the other buttons kind of start getting aligned. But if you don't get the top button right, then all the other ones are going to be off. And it doesn't make any sense to like start in the middle or start at the bottom. You want to start with the top one. You get that one right, and the others have a way of lining up. And I think that's
So
really
good.
true with abiding in Christ and connecting to Jesus. Like if I focus my energy on that and I get that top button right, these others require work and effort. Like there are other things that I need to address and practices and disciplines I need to put into place. But man, it gets a lot easier when that alignment is established. And so connecting to the vine, finding that abiding in Christ, the rest of it lines up without near as much effort. Effort may not be the right word, but because it does take effort, but it does it more naturally.
Yeah, it becomes fruit from what's actually from that abiding, right? And that's
that's right.
That's
It
what a
becomes fruit.
beautiful
That's a good way to
illustration
say
too.
it.
The top button that's an incredible illustration. I love that. It's like it just becomes, it starts producing this, and it may not be overnight, but it's over some time. You begin to see, I'm connected to the vine again. I'm abiding, and now I'm starting to see my attitudes change. My words with others are changing. My outlook on life. I'm being filled with courage and faith and hope. And what a great thing.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.